Okay, and we are now recording. Today's presentation is 5 easy ways to be more accessible. My name is Lauryn Woodman, and I'm an instructional designer with online learning. For those of you who've not attended any of my presentations in the past, I'm very laid back and open, so feel free to type any questions in the chat. I'll answer them as we go, or I'll let you know if I need to address it at the end. I just ask that you mute yourselves if you're not speaking, since it is just the two of you. If you don't want to mute and it's quiet where you are, that's fine. And feel free to unmute and interrupt me at any time if you have a question or something to add. Before we dive in, I want to go over what we'll discuss today. So this is our agenda. First, plan in advance. As you're finding materials, make sure they're accessible, know where you're going in your course. We'll talk about offering alternative means of accessing information. Flexibility, which includes flexibility in how students complete and turn in assignments, as well as being flexible with student needs. Clarity and consistency, so expectations, deadlines, writing clear instructions. Navigation and organization, how to have a well-organized course so students can actually find materials. So you notice this training isn't really tool specific, but it'll help us get in the mindset of accessibility. Does that sound good? Okay, and you can use your reactions too. Yes, I got a thumbs up. So the first easy way to be accessible is to plan for accessibility and to plan it in advance. When planning materials for your course, try to make sure they're accessible. Find book chapters that aren't scanned. Those horrible pixelated old photocopies or pictures of book chapters, they can't be read by a screen reader. A lot of times they can't even be read by someone who has full vision. So it's important to have content in your course that's already accessible, so you don't have to potentially fix it later. Try to use plain text documents or link out to websites that have text that can be read. Another thing you can do is to find videos with captions. If you search YouTube, you can check to see if a video has captions and see if they're accurate. There are some channels that are almost always captioned, like Khan Academy, Crash Course, TED Talks, and a whole lot more channels too. The library is also a great resource for accessible video content for your course. And this is just a close-up. Here you see, this is a YouTube video with captions on. So if there are captions, the CC button will appear. You click on that button and then captions should show on the video. So that is the arrow here. Accurate captions will generally have speaker names and punctuation in addition to being complete and correct. So I recommend watching through most or all of the video to see if the captions are adequate. If you routinely post PowerPoint presentations, try using or adapting the publisher PowerPoints, which should already be accessible. So that's a great starting place. And if you want to build your own PowerPoint presentations that are accessible, you might want to check out our session on Thursday, April 15th, to learn how to create accessible PowerPoint presentations. When I talk about planning, I always try to use a picture of an airplane because there's this great saying in instructional design that you don't want to be building the airplane while you're flying it. Likewise, you don't want to be coming up with ideas for how to run your course mid-semester. So know where you're going in your course. Know building the airplane while you're flying it. Having a plan in advance will allow you to find accessible materials and maintain good organization without scrambling at the last minute. And if you're using Blackboard, which we all are, right? Yes. Then know where you're going to put things in your course in Blackboard. So how do you plan? If you're new to teaching, or if you traditionally teach a course that's been created for you, this may not be intuitive, and that's okay. If you are building your course from the bottom up, you'll start by looking at the course outcomes and concepts. What is the content you want students to learn? What materials will they need? Textbooks? Is there interactive media out there? Helpful websites or any other innovative ways that they can learn the content? What activities will they do? And how will those activities contribute to meeting the objectives? And how will you assess that they've learned the content and met the objectives? This is an example of a course map template. You can see it has space for you to put in the course name, your name, or the instructor name, the semester, the course outcomes, and those can be found in My NCC, as well as any textbook, publisher materials, or other supplemental resources you plan to use. This follows a table type structure, and you'll see the first column has you enter the module, the class, the week, or the topic in the title of that week. So maybe week 1, chapter 1, World War I. Then you'd list out the course outcomes and the unit outcomes. So the course and unit outcomes would be specific for that week. So what are your learning outcomes for that week? And then how do they relate to those course outcomes that we talked about from the course outline? In the next column of the table, you'd enter the content and activities that you want to do. So students are going to read, watch a PowerPoint, maybe watch a video, go to a web link. You enter that into that column. In the next column, you add the assessments that you're going to use to assess that they've achieved the learning outcomes. And that can also include any rubrics that you have for certain assignments, especially if they're written assignments, and what kind of feedback students are going to get. And then in the last column, you have space for notes. This next slide is an alignment map, and I'm not going to go into this in too much depth, but this can help with that last column on the previous slide, or I should say that middle column in the previous slide, about learning outcomes and how you can align your unit level outcomes to your course level outcomes. This helps you just write really effective learning objectives. You would put in your module objective and you would say, what level of Bloom's is that? Bloom's taxonomy is a method for categorizing learning outcomes. And then you say how that aligns to the course learning outcome. So link your module or unit outcome to your course learning outcome. And this alignment map does also have the same space for materials and activities and assessments. So it's very similar. It just helps you break down the outcomes part of the equation. All right, offering alternatives. So online courses are notoriously text heavy. Usually your instructions are written, students read a notes guide or a PowerPoint, they review information on websites or read articles, and then they're writing and reading others' discussion board posts. A lot of text. So you can offer students different ways of accessing the information. So in addition to reading about classical conditioning, see if there's a YouTube video or create a video that also explains that concept. You can make a weekly introduction video or audio. You could also do a video or audio checklist for your students to go along with that text written version. And even if that media you want them, that content you want them to read is only available written, students have a lot of options for how they can access written content, right? It can be their textbooks, it could be journal articles, news articles, links to different websites. So try to mix up the different types of media, even if it is the same, written format. And there's no one way to do this. So you can use multiple methods, include different combinations of these ideas for each week, or even topic to topic, depending on what makes the most sense for your discipline and your course. I'm going to pause here before I go on to flexibility and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, so we'll move on to flexibility. So there are a few different aspects to flexibility that I want to discuss. The first is flexibility for submitting assignments. Since online courses are so text heavy, try to incorporate more interactive options for students who may struggle with the written medium. So try Flipgrid instead of a traditional written discussion board. Try offering different options for student assessments, like allowing students to turn in a paper or a project or create a video or a podcast or a website. Having those different options allows students to really shine in the way that they learn best. Next, I want to discuss how you can be flexible with student needs. So there may be students who have a disability in your course, and there may also be students who haven't disclosed a disability or certain need. So just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So are there things that you can do to make the course more accessible to all students? For example, posting lecture notes, study guides, and recorded lectures benefits all students, but it might especially benefit students who need more time to review the materials or who miss class due to personal or medical issues. Consider potential barriers for students to turn in work on a certain day or by a certain time. So for example, short exam periods can be an equity issue for students who don't have their own computers or who are working full time or taking care of children. Sporadic due dates can leave those with busy schedules or executive function issues scrambling to figure out when to submit work. Lastly, consider the demands of attendance policies for students who are sick or dealing with a disability or other medical or personal issue. So I know that this is a little controversial and there might be institutional rules and guidelines about attendance, and that might be something we want to strategically look at as an institution, especially as we return to our new normal post-COVID. So what are some creative ways to determine attendance besides physically seeing that a student is there? Well, one way could be to use data and reporting. So for example, Blackboard and Echo 360 both provide information about when students log in and access content. For instructors posting notes and lectures into Blackboard or posting videos in Echo 360, this information could be used to say, okay, well, you didn't make it to class today, but you accessed the lecture notes at this day and time, or you watched the video and I can see you watched the whole video on this day. So that counts as attendance. These creative solutions are more inclusive and they provide a more accessible classroom experience for everyone. Clarity and consistency. One of the best ways you can help students is to be clear about your expectations. So for example, netiquette and behavior. And netiquette is usually defined as our online etiquette. What are your expectations of students? How will they communicate with you and with each other? What kind of language is appropriate? And this might vary depending on the type of course and the instructor. So it's really important to spell that out for students, what your expectations are. Due dates. When is work due? Is it always due on the same day? If there's a really big project, are you telling them in advance? I find it's really helpful to post announcements and put reminders into the weekly folders for upcoming assignments. Even if it's in the syllabus, we know students don't always read the syllabus, right? And they can still miss it. You can also use the built-in due date feature in Blackboard to automate some of this for students. So if you set due dates, it will tell students that they have an upcoming assignment. Contact times and methods. So when can students expect to hear back from you? When will work be graded? How do they get in touch with you and when? This is even more important for things like office hours or setting individual meetings with students. Let them know how you want to be contacted. If it's email or phone, make sure you provide that information to them. Project instructions. What are the instructions for this big project? And this is really important if your course is primarily one type of assessment, maybe discussion boards or quizzes, and then boom, there's this different kind of project. So if it's unlike anything students have done before in your course, they might not even know where to begin. So offering them examples, offering them a rubric can really come in handy too. Checklists and course instructions. So this is a point I am maybe most passionate about. Tell your students what you want them to do. There's no need to be cryptic. It might seem like to you that putting a bunch of links into Blackboard is enough, and it really is not. I have seen instructors say, do everything in this folder. And then there's like 10 links and 5 videos. And it's like, what are they supposed to do with that? What's required? What's optional? What is the quiz going to be on? Those are questions students have. So having a clear checklist for students is vital, and it should be fairly consistent week to week. So for example, barring special projects, an example for week 1 might be read chapter 1, watch the video, read the New York Times article, post to the discussion board, respond to 2 posts on the discussion board, take the quiz. And this carries over for assignments also. So if you have an assignment, write clear, thorough, and effective instructions. Anticipate confusion, anticipate questions. If this is a course that you teach consistently, you know what those common questions are. So anticipate what we call the muddy points, or the points where students can get really confused and lost. Speaking of writing clear and effective instructions, here's a quote I found that I thought you'd all really enjoy. So I'm going to read that to you. This is actually from an article that is called Cognitive Difficulties, an Overlooked Aspect of Accessible Design. And the author of this article, Chris Atherton, had a medical issue that caused brain fog. And it was the first time that Chris realized, wow, like it can be really hard if you have executive function issues or any kind of cognitive issues, just to hold a simple conversation. It's so much more taxing. So Chris writes, so be kind. Design, online and off, for people who usually, through no fault of their own, cannot engage with complexity. Use shorter, familiar words and shorter sentences. Give users as few choices as possible, presented one by one. If there's a way to engineer things so that users don't have to enter a lot of information themselves, choose that. Do the hard work to make it simple. And I really love that. Do the hard work to make it simple. We never want to make things harder for instructors, but setting your course up in advance, doing a little bit of work to plan effectively, to write effective and consistent and clear expectations and instructions for your students can really do the work to make it simple for them in the end. All right, before I move on to navigation and organization, which is our last category, does anybody have any questions? Okay, so navigation and organization. This is probably one of the most important aspects of general accessibility. Make sure your course has clear and intuitive navigation. One way to do this is to keep the base navigation in Blackboard whenever possible. That way it's the same for students from course to course. Avoid renaming those course links unless it's clearly explained or for more clarity. For example, I've seen people rename Blackboard Collaborate Ultra to Class Meeting Room, and that makes sense. But I wouldn't rename Blackboard Collaborate Ultra to Super Fun Hangout. That's maybe not going to make as much sense to your students. Avoid creating duplicate menu links and check for duplicates after course copy. So sometimes you do a course copy and you end up with multiples of the same information. And this creates a lot of confusions for students, but it also is a nightmare for instructors because you've got multiple content. Usually some of it isn't updated and you're scrambling to figure out where students are seeing certain information. Avoid creating new course links unless they add to part of the curriculum for students or are really important. Usually any additional folders or information you want to add can go into the learning content folder rather than being created as a separate menu item on the left. Make sure course content is organized by chapter, by week, by unit, by module, by topic. Just make sure to keep all topical content in one place and mark the folders with the date so that students know where to go for all of their content at any given point in time. Avoid having assignments or course materials for the same week across multiple folders. And I know that might sound kind of confusing, so what do I mean? So it might be common practice, and I've seen this before, where all of the PowerPoints are in one folder and all the assignment links are in another folder and the tests are in another folder. So imagine that you're visually impaired and you have to navigate using a screen reader. So you have to go to 3 or 4 different areas in the course just to gather all of the work that you need for that week. I have seen this firsthand, and it is such an unnecessary strain on the student. So this goes along with what I said earlier. There's no need to be cryptic. There's no need to make it a scavenger hunt. Put all of their content for that week in one place, in one folder. So again, this is accessible design that benefits all students, because all students will be very grateful that they don't have to go to 4 different folders to find what work they have to do that week. So again, if you've planned ahead, you'll know where to put those items in your course and everything will have a place. So these are just examples. You can see the left-hand menu is the base navigation in Blackboard. This is a college success course. And this is the base navigation with the addition of what is the final project folder for the course. And in learning content, that's the folder that we're open to. You see we have this topic, which is college culture and effective communication. And then within that folder, we have learning objectives, we have a checklist, we have a Flipgrid this week, and you see there's very clear instructions for students about how to access the Flipgrid. We move on to the next slide. You see a module link for students to review and tells them what they're supposed to do. There's a written discussion board, and there is also an assignment for students to complete. So each activity is clearly labeled and marked, and it's included in that checklist for students. Okay, so that concludes the presentation part of our session. I would, at this point, typically break you into groups, and your group would discuss some things you could do to be more accessible. I think we can have that as a group conversation. We can talk about things you could do to be more accessible. We can deep dive on something I covered, or consider an idea that you have of your own and discuss how you might implement it in your course or a course that you're assisting a faculty member on.
So I find myself creating a lot of content, and it's very text heavy. And part of it is the limitations, I think, sometimes of the tools that I'm using. But if there's like any other advice you have for that, for like, you know, including graphics. I know when you do graphics, you have to include all text, with videos. I'm trying to mix up, you know, the media and maybe do some things in like infographics, but then I'm also a little challenged by my ability to design those things. So, and the one thing in particular is the PDF situation. And I don't know if there's any way to help make PDFs more accessible. I'd probably need the full Adobe suite for it, but.
Okay, so there's a lot there. And I'm glad Jason is on this call because I'm sure he has some ideas as well. I'll start with the Adobe. So I would first question, do they have to be PDFs? Could they be Word documents? You know, we worry about people's ability to change them. At this point, you can change PDFs as well, especially if you have the full Adobe suite. And I really doubt that students are, you know, changing LibGuides just for fun, you know. I would go start with, can they be Word documents? Sandy and I are doing a session Thursday about how to make your documents more accessible with headers and tables, and even with images in there, there is a lot that you can do. And some of that does transfer over to a PDF as well. So I guess the question is, what is that PDF? If it is mostly plain text with headers, maybe a couple of images, it is pretty simple to transfer that over to Adobe, and with the full suite. I'm not sure about the free version, but with the full suite, you can do some of the same as far as making sure the reading order is correct, adding alt text and that stuff. And especially if you are creating it, it's pretty easy to create it in a way that's accessible. Sometimes editing existing documents can be a little bit of a nightmare. but it's pretty easy to design for accessibility in Word, and even transferring that to PDF. I guess I would also say then videos and infographics. I'm torn on infographics because I think they look really great, but are often very inaccessible. And typically what I see is an infographic and then like a plain text kind of below it of the information, rather than trying to add in like alt text and things like that. So that's one direction that you could go. I think videos are great, especially if they are captioned or have a transcript. Even if it's kind of a repeat of the text information, it's just another way of accessing it. Jason, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is right in terms of if you create a Word document, you can easily export it out to a PDF. I was looking to see if the free version of Adobe has it. Looks like I thought they had an accessibility checker on their Adobe Reader. But it's not responding. That somehow I got signed out, so I'm trying to figure out how to sign back into my Adobe Suite. Yeah, I mean, if you run the accessibility checker in Word, then it's by and large going to be accessible within a PDF as well. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are creating, PDFs, that's where you'd want to use InDesign for that specifically, right?
Yeah.
versus opening up Adobe Reader and trying to do something in there. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And you can, I would reach out to IT and request access to, at the very least, Adobe Acrobat Pro, which is included as part of Creative Cloud. And if it is, if that's something that you are doing a lot of, then that might make more sense.
That's very helpful, actually. So I will look into doing that. It's been many, many years since I was in InDesign, so.
Yeah. I mostly use it to make like pretty graphics, and that's about it. But yeah, I think starting with Word and then exporting out is probably your best option. You can also do things with Canva as well, and then add alt text if you need to, or depending on, some of that stuff is very inaccessible and some of it is surprisingly accessible, so you really just have to check. And there are free tools that you can use to check. Read and Write is one of them. That's a tool that we have from the college. Yeah, so that's kind of what I use to check and see if a PDF has good reading order. Jason, do you have any feedback or other thoughts about the presentation, or thoughts on accessibility?
No, I mean, I think it was really helpful when you talked about having multiple options for students to submit assignments. And so, giving them the freedom to do a written assignment or some sort of multimedia assignment, I think that's really helpful. That's hard when I work with faculty to get them to wrap their mind around that aspect. And to, because I think in most of our minds, it's, well, they have to write me something or they have to do something. And so everybody does the same thing. And so I think it's hard then to be like, well, they can do multiple things. I remember working with an instructor at one of the other institutions I was at, where they were doing a multimedia assignment. But the student was given the freedom to either write a poem, to take a picture of something and to describe it, to take a video, to draw, to paint, was given a wide variety of creative outlets, and it was all gathered underneath of one heading in terms of I don't remember why they had to submit that now, but they could choose from any of those mediums, and I think that was helpful for students because there was an ownership to the project. They weren't confined to just do one thing, and so if a student felt like they could write a poem better, then they could take a video or draw, they were offered that option. So I think that's helpful to remember.
Yeah. And I've worked with faculty to build in some of that into their rubrics. So when you think about like when you're grading, you could say this paper must be 500 words, or a video must be, 2 minutes long, or, you can break it down so that things have the same categories within your rubric, but they're just like kind of the criteria is a little bit different.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think too, one of the other things you talked about in terms of flexibility was the due dates of items. And so, thinking about those short turnaround times that could be problematic for students, or like you said, having like those sporadic due dates where there's not a consistency, or if there's consistency, it's a very short consistency, right? And so being able to spread out assignments is really helpful. And I think that's where if you do formative assessments leading up to a summative assessment, that can be really helpful, because students are submitting things to you, and they're getting feedback, so they're building the project along the way. But I've certainly seen where students have to submit something and then 2 days later have to make corrections to something where they just got feedback 24 hours ago, right? And that's really difficult. And I've even seen that in some of the professional development stuff that we've done, and it's like, that's not helpful, for students, because they not only might have, cognitive issues or some sort of ability to not do that, they might just have plans in general, right? And so for them, it's, well, I don't have time to do this because I have some sort of family obligation, or maybe I have another course that I'm working on. So.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a really good point too, because I always wonder what kind of work are students doing when they're rushing to get it done. When you see students who are turning in work 3 minutes before that deadline, sometimes it's a procrastination issue, but sometimes, they really have the best intentions of wanting to do the work, but they're kind of constricted by these really tight deadlines. And something I talked about in the equity presentation that I did was having the ability to do what I call like milestones rather than like hard deadlines. So like, all of this work needs to be done by this day, and here's the suggested schedule, but you can either turn it in on that schedule, but all of it has to be turned in by this day, which might not work out great for students who have procrastination or time management issues, but can be a great option for those who are really trying to balance their schedule with their life. Something else that I talked about a little bit that I am really passionate about, though, is attendance policies, because it is so interesting to me when you think about engagement. Like, showing up is the bare minimum. that is like what we call like ritual compliance. Like, you were there, and I feel like we put a lot of weight on that. But how many times have we been in a meeting and we're like totally somewhere else? Even if we're physically there, we're just totally somewhere else. And to me, I think students should have the ability to, like I said, if you can review a lecture at another time or review the coursework, by a certain time, rather than you have to be in this physical space, even if it's an online physical space, you have to be at this physical space and at this specific time, to me seems so antiquated in the time that we're in. And a lot of students, I think, learn better on their own when they can like do it on their own time rather than in this 1 hour that you've set aside. So I'm really passionate about, I will say, relaxing rather than abolishing attendance policies.
Yeah, and I think especially, as you deal with older adult learners, right? And they're here because they want to be here, right? And so punishing them for not showing up or not, it's just not always a good practice, like you said. So
I'm really getting frustrated by the idea that like the only way we can help people or teach them something is by, talking to them or having FaceTime with them. And I think it does a disservice if things are so mystifying that the only way they can get something is by talking to somebody or, asking questions.
Yeah. I've had experiences even with what I've done with faculty where I've designed whole courses with faculty over email. Without ever having a web meeting, just because we communicated really effectively in a written format. I work with a faculty member who is in Germany, who I've never met, will never meet, to design a course. And time was super relative because we were on such different terms. And so, yeah, there are a lot of ways to do it that don't involve, especially being physically present, but even, like you said, in real time, virtually, there are a lot different and I think better ways to communicate. So Cindy, I see that you joined us. So we had actually wrapped up the main part of the presentation and we were talking brainstorming of things we could do to be more accessible, either something I covered or an idea that you have. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on accessibility or questions that you've had about accessibility.
Not really. I do base my communication and my courses on the different students. Once I get a feel for what their preferred kind of method is of communication, I kind of adopt that, and it may be different for every student. Some of them prefer email back and forth, and that's fine. Some of them would rather say, can I stop by your office for 15 minutes and have you explain this to me? That's fine. It's just knowing the person in your course and adopting your modalities towards that. And I agree, the deadlines on a lot of things are our set deadlines, but they don't really help the student because, like you said, you have those procrastinators. They're going to do it at the last minute anyway, but then you're going to have those that are, busy with their own life, that maybe submitting a paper on Friday is not good for them. It's just, it's too structured. It needs to be a little more student based than it is based on what an instructor feels should be the timeline.
Yeah. I really like your point also about like kind of feeling out your students and offering them different ways to connect with you, which I don't know if we talked about so much, but that is a really great point as far as like, having the availability for email or maybe text or phone or office hours, and letting students kind of interface with you in a way that works best for them.
Yeah.
Great idea. All right, so we have some resources here. There's an interesting article on 5 tips for ADA compliant inclusive design, as well as the link to that course map and course template that I kind of showed screenshots of. And I'm going to hang out here in case anybody has any questions. But at this point, we are done with the presentation. I'm going to stop recording. And like I said, I'll be on if anyone wants to chat.